and welcome. My name's Andy Reid. I'm the director of the Sports Thinktank, and today we're joining one of the 29 organisations that have helped us in our 2024 manifesto project. We were challenged to come up with policy ideas for a new government after the next election, which would probably not have great resource implications. As we all know, the economy and the public finances are in a position where spending is going to be very difficult for the next period. So these individual organisations have come together. We've created the pamphlet, which is available on our website, but we wanted to give each of the contributors a little bit more time to expand on what they're trying to say in their chapter. So let's head over to the next one in this series of this Sports Think Tank 2024 manifesto. Well, hello and welcome to the latest in the Manifesto series of podcasts, and I'm actually really pleased to be joined today by Katherine Knight from Intelligent Health. So, as with others, Katherine, I don't do the introductions. We'll put the biog on there, but it's a great opportunity for you to explain a little bit of your journey into this sport, physical activity and wellbeing sector, and then probably more importantly, people may have heard of the organisation from across the sector, but just to put a little bit of background to where Intelligent Health has come from, where it is at the moment, and probably what you're hoping to achieve in the future. And then we'll go into the depth of the things that you've been saying in the chapter.
Okay, lovely to see you again, Andy. So my name's Katherine Knight. I've been working in sport and physical activity for over 25 years. I started at the Football Association in the 90s. My ambition was to work in women's football. I had that ambition before I realised the FA weren't actually running women's football. So I was an early, one of the first members of staff that worked on women's football, built the first communications strategy and helped it become the top female participation sport in the 90s. So that was amazing and learnt a lot about it. Really proud moments in there. And then I went away and did various things. I've had children, still always worked in the sports sector, and also started working in education. I became a chair of a school and then worked in and a governor in another school. And then I had a bit of an epiphany and realised that all my life I've been trying to support tackling inequalities. Actually, I wouldn't call it that, but trying to get women into football. And, probably a little bit to the detriment of, come over from netball or something, so it's not necessarily, it's quite adversarial, some of that, because we were trying to make it attractive to women, and it wasn't, we were just missing a whole generation of people who actually didn't care. They didn't like any sport whatsoever. And I saw a tiny article in the Reading Post, and it was Dr. William Bird, talking about this little programme he was starting, which was a walking challenge for schools. I read it and said, do you want a hand? Because actually I think I'm quite impassioned about this. And that was 10 years ago. And we've now had nearly 2 million participants through over 170 programmes playing, getting active through walking and cycling. But I'm still very interested in sport and physical activity. I think it's really important, and I've been chair of Rounders England for the last 5 years, because they're a brilliant in between physical movement into physical activity and that social connection and wonderful things. Sport, the joy that sport brings, Rounders perfectly personifies.
Yeah. And intelligent energy, you sort of touched on it, and this is how we probably met and through the Rounders. But more importantly, I think that little bit where you described that moment when you listened to William.
And I think lots of people
we've all had probably one of those
that.
epiphanies, haven't we? Where I think I was just saying to you before, sort of listened to William and thought, actually, I've really always been into sport and physical activity because I know it's good. But actually, for the first time, I've really heard why physiologically and sort of medically, etc., why exactly it is. So it might be worth sort of mentioning that at some stage during this, isn't it? Just that background to that whole piece, which you do in the chapter. So a little bit more probably about William and where you've come through on that intelligent journey.
Absolutely. So William's been it started as a GP in the 90s and has always been an advocate for preventative health and the importance of, when drugs are needed, they definitely are, but actually there's a lot of non-communicable diseases we have now where you could be tackling them in a different way, and we need to do that, and it's just not being sorted, and the reason is we're fundamentally still hunter-gatherers, and he can go through all of of why we haven't changed, even though our lifestyles have, and we've become much more sedentary and isolated in the frictionless world we've created has made us ill, and part of what we need to do is get back to some of that connection with nature, social connection, and using physical activity as the lever is the most simple approach, and getting people outside together is the biggest impact you can have. And it's a quite a simple mantra, and he's managed to talk about that eloquently over the last sort of 20 odd years, and then put into practice what he means. So created health walks, green gym, and beat the street to try and enable people to get active. But as we were just mentioning, you still also have all the challenges that society face, that you need to look at policy and practice to make it easier for people. It's not just their responsibility. There's social determinants of health, commercial determinants that are barriers as well, and even our own sector and organisation. All of these different things need to be looked at to make it as easy for people to move as possible, and that's what Intelligent Health, our mission is building active communities, and that's everything that we do to try and change that.
Yeah. So the new terminology in and around all that isn't this sort of systems thinking, but you were probably doing that before we really called it systems thinking and systems approach to stuff, isn't it? Because it is those other determinants, isn't it? And that's hopefully what part of this whole manifesto piece is around, is trying to look at the wide. We all work a little bit in our silos, don't we? And we love our individual sports, or we love sport, but actually much of what we're trying to do is outside of our sector. A Foresight report in 2007 with all, physical activity is part of the sort of response to obesity, but there's lots of other pieces to that. Obesogenic society in which marketing and you're in exactly the same place with this physical activity, isn't it? There's so much that makes it easier for us not to be physically active. We've designed it out of our lifestyles, isn't it? So I suppose that's
Absolutely.
your challenge, isn't it? How do you design it back, taking 40, 50 years to get it out? It's not an overnight, but slowly that's what you want to bring back in. Is it worth just touching a little bit on that messaging around the physiology of why it's one of the inactivity in itself as one of the biggest issues around non-communicable diseases, and some of those what are some of those social determinants and sort of societal determinants that for those who, going on a little bit, but there's too many people I think who talk about being self-motivation, and actually if only people got off the couch, but it's not like that, is it? It's a bit more complicated, and
No.
explain that a bit better than I can.
And actually I was reading a brilliant blog by Greg Fell, the Director of Public Health for Sheffield this morning, that explains it really well, really angrily, about how we can't put the blame on people. It's a false narrative, as is the false narrative of kind of a nanny state and the dangers of that. Actually, it's this concept of freedom from and freedom to, and what commercial organisations and various people will talk about is the freedom to be able to smoke, to drink, to do what we want. But it isn't fair when you actually look at the freedom from being marketed. When you look at gambling, or you look at the promotion of sugary drinks or alcohol, you've not got a level playing field, so you don't have the freedom to make a choice, because you're actually being bombarded with arguments and reasons to behave in a certain way. So you're not operating in a bubble, you are being influenced by all those things, and then there's certain structural things that just make it harder. So if you're living in an area of higher deprivation, there's lots of data that shows that you may not have access to fruit and vegetables in certain places, or it's much more expensive, and it's much easier for you to buy the high fat, high calorie, low quality food, which when you're working on a realistically small budget, you don't have the choice that is portrayed that you have the choice to do it. It's not a real choice. So if you're going to really understand how to tackle them, you have to come at it from lots of different angles. And I think that's why this document you've pulled together is so fascinating, and why we so enjoyed pulling it together, because it's something we've been wrestling with for years. How do we explain how physical activity sits as a lever to tackle some of the biggest issues? And we felt like we were talking in silo to active travel, or to health, or to sport, and trying to sort of turn the same thing we're talking about to different audiences, and actually we've just flipped it.
Yeah.
And I think this helped us do it. And kind of our sort of message now is that, ill health, inequalities and climate change are tackling the resilience of communities and councils. And they're all interlinked and overlapping. And if you only tackle one, you're missing the opportunity with the other. And so the manifesto asks, you can see all the ones you've brought together are saying we need to collaborate, we need to tackle these big issues and create a better world for people. And if you can identify the purpose, then you can see how things interlink.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And even though we've got quite a breadth, obviously, of organisations involved with this, there could and should be far more, because even this covers the breadth from play right through to elite sport. And as we were saying, and you probably come on to this, each bit has its role to play with different segments of society. So it's not, just because you're into physical activity and movement doesn't mean people in sport aren't important, because actually we need to maintain that infrastructure as well for those who see that as their set mechanism. But these are the wider determinants. You're quite right. I mean, a part of what we're trying to show here is especially the challenge to you all of, if there's no new money for the next few years, how do you shift policies and probably regulations and others to shift some of those behaviours? So this is about behaviour change, isn't it? And so it's trying to demonstrate that actually we aren't solely the solution, but we can help others understand by improving active travel, by active environments, the stuff that I don't really want to touch about it, but a giveaway when we're recording this, but William was in front of one of the select committees in the House of Commons this week, explaining that on children's mental health and well-being and development and their sort of resilience, just how important the built environment, and hence why we put a lot of emphasis on the play stuff with Eugene and things in here, because it's just those simple things, isn't it?
Yeah, and when you reflect, you get very stuck in the world you're working in, don't you? When you just then think what it fundamentally matters to people, it is their health, it is the health of the people they love, it is the place they live in and they want to have pride in it. And so the shift through United the Movement of working in that place-based way is fantastic. And we've worked with 160 odd places now, and they're all in such different places in where they're working, how they're working, what their priorities are. But actually, overall, it's the same. We need to make the world a better, healthier place, the environment and for people. And there isn't much budget around. So if we're going to do this, we need to look at how you repurpose what is there. So I think you have to have policy. You have to look at how you change some of the, some of the levies. We talk about, the road tax, new roads, a percentage of it going into creating a walkable structure. Planning, having place efficiency in planning, so just bringing in that kind of concept, and then enabling people and empowering them through things like social marketing, which is taking marketing principles tried and trusted from the commercial sector into public health. And how do you help create a social norm where people do feel it's safe, but you have to tackle some of the big issues as well. So for children playing in the streets, it isn't safe in some places for them to do it. So how can we create a world so the parents feel like the risk is reduced, so the children are enabled to do it, because we know there's a big problem of mental health for children, and a lot of that is because the risk has been reduced, and Eugene will talk about that eloquently. We work with Play Streets. Play Streets are an amazing social movement of parents trying to do something positive, and those bright spots need to be highlighted and supported and taken across with good examples. So there's behaviour change, but you have to have the other things alongside it, because it's not down to just the people, it's all of us.
And in fact, so there's 2 or 3, I'm jotting down stuff as we go, because you sort of trigger some other really good thoughts. I mean, some of that in particular I've picked up around some of your ideas around these sort of I suppose citizens' juries and other pieces, and so it all comes back to this co-creation of solutions by the communities themselves, don't they? And we talk about that, because I teach civil servants and try to get them to understand you're not delivering things to people. It's how do we let go and let those decisions be made locally. And just to build on that, I suppose you're entirely right, is that different environments have different outcomes and different requirements. So here in Leicestershire, you work with us here in Leicester and Leicestershire. Leicester is very different to Rutland. Most counties will have that sort of 8-mile journey from the city centre to the rural sort of suburbs, and health, life looks different in every one of those. So big issues like 15-minute neighbourhoods and others, access to countryside, a lot of evidence I think you're demonstrating around green space and sort of trees. There's lots of stuff that sometimes can sound a little bit nice, but actually we've discovered is, you go back to your some of your models in your chapter, they're actually fundamental to us, aren't they? Just playing.
As humans, we're
yeah.
animals.
Yeah.
We forget that. We pretend we're sophisticated. Fundamentally, we're human animals and social beings. And I think that's one of the things that's really attracted me to William's work and what we do is that concept of us being social. And I think that is where sport is really powerful as well. The social impact you see of being together, you with your rugby, me with my football, the rounders communities, the amazing team relationships that are built, or Parkman, the amazing community place that they can generate on a Saturday morning and beyond through social. And I think we can't underestimate that, and that is a real strength of the sector, and we need to show that and bring it to light, definitely.
It's been really interesting because I've sort of, tried to retire and tried to spend more time. So I have had more time for reading and podcasts and things. And actually, most of what I've read about how, what meaning in life and all those rest of it, but most of it does come back, quite a lot of the podcasts, to actually going back, like you just said, right at the beginning of this podcast, about where we started as human beings and what we needed then. And actually, most of the responses and needs I've found of a meaningful life is to go back to how we should have lived or should be living, and it's only this last 100 years or so in which we've probably made that really, really difficult to do as human beings. And so little things like loneliness and social connection are being lost because of the way we're designing society and those pieces. So I think, just going back a little bit to your citizens' juries idea and things, I mean, that's because I talk about co-creation, but how do you get local communities really involved in designing their local community rather than planners just coming in? And you've seen all those artists' impressions of how wonderful these places are going to look, but then you go and they don't look anything like them, do they? So
I think
we get right?
It's interesting, and we haven't got the answer right. I think we're all working on it. I mean, just to start, I actually did a philosophy degree, and I did Greek philosophy, and a lot of it was about what is a good human, and I keep coming back to those books and go back, and obviously you don't copy everything. There were certain things they probably didn't get right, and you're not saying you're returning to those states, but actually how we've evolved as humans is certainly in the last sort of 100 years or so has been so phenomenal in technology and the frictionless world we can live in, and we've lost some of the things that did keep us together. And you saw, the awful COVID pandemic, there were some incredible moments of community togetherness and things. And I'm reading John Alexander's Citizens at the moment, and you can see, as terrible things do happen, you still, as a human nature, we are designed to be together, and that comes through. So the citizens' assemblies, I only really started looking at them recently, but it was the one in Ireland. I don't know if you heard they debated abortion, which is obviously an incredibly challenging topic in a predominantly Catholic country, and they just couldn't work it through with politicians. It was too polarised, and the church and the state discussing it. So taking a group of 100-odd people for different environments, and then giving them a really long period of time of education. So it wasn't about just what do you think and here's your view, but really listening, doing proper participative democracy and challenging and having different speakers on both sides of the debate, and then being able to come to a conclusion, led to them changing the abortion laws. And I think that shows real hope and sense, and you can see it's been happening in some of the LDP, the local delivery pilots, and even in some of the programmes we've been working in Burnley. It's happening now, and you're looking at asset-based, so where's the strength of a place? Because if you ask someone about when they live somewhere, there's usually something about it that they like, and they actually know they like their park, or they like the pub, or whatever it is that their neighbours, and starting there and understanding, properly listening, you can start to help see what ideas could come out that makes people together. And again, I'd go back to the Play Streets example. I set up a Play Streets about 8 years ago with my neighbours, led by another neighbour. Absolutely brilliant. Got everyone out, got the kids out playing, but also got the older residents out leaning over the, quite a busy area, talking to people, just because it was nice to see people out and they weren't sat on their own. And so those kind of things, getting citizens together, works. Having those conversations led to other stuff. We did a load of things together because you'd mobilised. So getting citizens together, helping them think about what it is that matters to them, and help them come up with the answers, because you live in a place, you know it better than anyone else, and giving that sense of agency. And to help when you haven't got more money coming, we've got to work harder. None of us have the answers. You've got 66 odd million people in the country. There are people with good ideas, they're maybe just not being listened to. So
And I found that a real challenge in policy making. I mean, it is easier for a completely different example, but one where you were sort of slightly involved up here in Leicestershire, but things around some of that central government funding where it comes down with a particular stream and it's got to be spent on this. Engaging those communities, it's not just about just asking them after you've decided what to do. So it's a real mind shift for a lot of policymakers to understand that you start the other way around with communities.
And it takes time and a little bit of leap of faith. And some kind of imagine sort of confidence, but you've got sectors who are working the new local. I don't know if you know that.
I follow those.
So they've brought together sort of like-minded councils who are looking at doing things differently. Big local. There's examples. They were given sort of $1 million a year to communities over 10 years to try and facilitate that. There are examples of how it works. So it's not like we're starting from scratch, but for us, that connectivity, the use of sport and physical activity, the daily walking, the daily behaviours, the movement into your green space, the ownership of your place, helps build resilience, helps improve health, helps create better environmental outputs. It does all of those things. And so if you're kind of starting with that premise, you can bring people together, because it does, look at what's strong, not what's a problem. I think that helps. It's certainly helping the way we're trying to work, and you can see it through the local delivery pilots as well.
I think they're probably a prime example of that, haven't we, where we tipped things on their head, and there've been some great stuff. I suppose one of the frustrations for all of us is about where you really see good stuff, how we then share it and replicate it. It's part of what this is about, really, is that we want to highlight those good things that are happening, so that people don't. I often find people email me or come up with, I've got this great idea. I said, somebody's already doing that. Should we just replicate or work with them to? It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but let's just build on what's already out there, because not that many ideas are particularly new, are they?
No, definitely not. That's what I mean.
There are some, but not many.
I go back to the Greeks. It doesn't have to be that new. Or other examples where you've seen. I'm a bit of a magpie. I think you could look at lots of different things. I think where we're working, we've got a brilliant ops group who sit with us, and we try and share good practice in different places. The challenge is always how you then avoid becoming top down and saying these are things that have worked.
Yes.
But if you're saying these are things that have worked, they're down to you to understand if that is a good idea. So playing out is an example. We would always recommend in a place that this could be a good solution to continue getting people active and connected. But we would never make someone take it. It's highlighting that good practice. And you're right, there's so much good practice in there. It's having space for both. And that is a bit of time as well, and building trust with people.
It's that bit, again, in the stuff I do at Cranfield, that little bit about sort of evidence-based policy making and how much you're prepared to innovate and take risks. Because actually you can spend all your time gathering data and evidence and then tell somebody this will work, whereas actually just been talking to Sported as one of these podcasts, the whole point of that is that they're usually locally trusted leaders or organisations, aren't they, who come up with their own solution, and it's at that point you might be able to say, we're not telling you what to do, but actually we have found these work, do any of these tools work for you? And it's then a local choice that fits that community, doesn't it? You could reject it because there might be a completely different emphasis, or it might be a particular demographic that doesn't want to do those sort of things, or it can't at the particular time you're suggesting. But just giving people the tool after they've decided what it is that they want to do, I think is probably
Yes, I think that's a brilliant
fine balance, isn't it?
Yeah, I think agreeing those principles, the ways of working, what they want to do, then these are some good examples. And here is what is in your place, being able to, or working together to be able to map what assets they do have. I mean, we did some brilliant work in Burnley, and Burnley's focus is, as they've decided, is an outdoor town. So it's got lots of challenges, but actually the big strength of their place is you've got the Pennines all around, and you've got amazing parks, amazing canal, and rivers, and all these different things. And so that's their strength, and they've fostered real pride around that, and that has then unlocked further funding to tackle climate change, to work with the canals to improve the safety. There's all of these things then move away. The NHS are now very interested from it because it's improving health, and it all starts to interlink. And it felt sort of fragmented to start with, but as they got working with people really in depth in places, and purposefully working with the groups that weren't necessarily always the ones listened to, it's really rich, and it's a really powerful story.
I'm sort of with you on that, and that whole piece around infrastructure is really important, isn't it? And so therefore that's where we do have the ability with regulation and guidance to make some pretty substantial changes. I suppose we said at the beginning it's not down to individuals' sort of choices necessarily with all these other factors, but behaviour change clearly is, and I find this absolutely fascinating. My daughter's doing a health psychology masters at the moment in behaviour change in sport and physical activity, so she finds all this fascinating. If you've got any tips for her latest sort of assignment, that'd be really helpful. But that is the crucial bit, isn't it? How sort of individual behaviour change and also societal levels of behaviour change, and so we can do all of those other pieces, but it still requires something. And there's other pieces in this pamphlet, but it does require somebody to make that change eventually at an individual level.
And that can be, and it's,
isn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of the stuff about behaviour change says, it takes so many days to make a habit, and it's like, well, it depends on the behaviour you're changing.
Yes.
If you're addicted to gambling, it's going to take a harder piece of work and probably support from other factors. If you're trying to get someone to do something relatively small, it is achievable, and then they can have a sense of achievement and own it. You can really make change. And when you're making small changes to daily behaviours for a large portion of people, then you're making sizable change at scale, and then that becomes some social norming. So, for example, parents not driving children to school or idling the cars outside. It's very hard to shift just by telling them not to, because I'm busy, I've got to drop my child. If all of you are doing it, then all of a sudden it's I don't want to be the bad parent turning up with the car idling when everyone else is, and my child is telling me not to. So you've got to look at it from all the different angles and make it something that is positive. I think you can do black hat, white hat, but I think for us it's trying to show a possible world where you are able to make the changes and you succeed in doing it is going to have the likelihood of being able to continue. And obviously life changes, so you're never going to stick at something forever. Me and you've spoken about, I retired my football career earlier this year. You retired rugby and came back again.
Every year for the last 18 years, sadly, but
I now have, but you can't have the same sporting career and your behaviours change if you've got children and work, and there's big life moments. So just having things that are simple and regular, and that we shared some of the data in the thing that shows, sport has a really important part to play in physical activity, but it's only part of the picture, and it's the regular walking and cycling and daily movement that is the thing that has the biggest impact on health. And we have to create the opportunities for people to do that if we want to tackle inactivity at scale, and that's kind of our argument.
And I think we were talking about that before, and I know you carefully do that in the pamphlet as well, but sport has an important role to play. That's why we've called it, as I said, sport, physical activity and well-being. but actually, and it is probably for me. I think like you, we've talked about this before. It's that social glue, isn't it? For me, what is it day? It's a Wednesday today, so I'm probably addicted to at 7:30. I need to be on that with the rest of the team sort of training, and there's a sort of a real focal point for the week to do that. But I mean, 6 days a week, I also need to be doing something else physical, whether that's just walking and building into my daily lives. And for most people, that's where this system change will come, isn't it? It'll be building physical activity back into the way that we run our lives, so it doesn't have to become a thing. It doesn't have to be something you timetable. I know this is we've got the gym sector involved in this, but almost going to get to a point where you don't need to have to artificially go to somewhere else to be physically active, because actually your lifestyle has changed. So that comes
and
back
it isn't easy.
Sorry, yeah.
It has been wired out. My grandparents, none of them drove. So they had to get the bus if they wanted to go there. My granddad bikes it, but not because he wasn't a cyclist. No. He was just getting to his work in his paint factory. He didn't need to. He wasn't getting fit. It was just a convenient way of doing it. And he lived in central Birmingham. That it might not be as easy to do that now. I walked to work this morning. I had to navigate a really dangerous roundabout where you have to run because there's no crossing. I had to spend a lot on the train, and you're thinking, well, of course, is this worth it? This is a bit of effort, but it's the only way I can. I've got a busy day. It's the only way I can put physical activity into my day. Listen to a couple of really good podcasts, sang as I was jogging along, and so I now feel quite lively because I was lucky enough to be able to do that. But for me, it doesn't beat putting studs on and running out onto a pitch.
No, exactly. Yeah.
But it makes me feel better.
Yeah, and this is that bit I think where there's a sort of crossover about the individual behaviour change and at a societal level, because you're right, we've designed physical activity out of our lives. I mean, some of that will be planning out of time, shopping centres, industrial estates on the edge of towns and things where it's difficult for people to get to. And if we work in a warehouse, we've got a big airport up here. If you're poor and live on the other side of Loughborough, it's a really early bus at 5 o'clock in the morning. You're not getting home until 7 o'clock at night after a long shift. Apart from what are you going to do? So a lot of these other things, I think you've mentioned these. The sort of 20 is enough. I don't think you've mentioned the 15-minute neighbourhoods and all these other pieces. How do we rebuild? Particularly, I saw that the mayor in London is now suggesting that Friday is an off. That they're probably doing a sort of an experiment around Friday being off peak as well, because actually post-COVID, that Friday, it was already declining before, wasn't it? But people in London on Fridays just not happening, going back into work. So people there's a different work pattern. So how do we help people to sort of build it into the daily lives, even if they're not commuting? So your 20 is enough. And I suppose it's the politics of this, isn't it? I spoke at an environment conference this week and at Loughborough University, just to highlight really, we're in a difficult period, that many of the assumptions and norms, doing 20-mile-an-hour zones seems a really rational thing to do, but we've seen some of the pushback. And have you come across that in some of the work that doing?
And it's fascinating. And even with my family, we had a conversation at Christmas which was about car use, and it's so polarised, and it's such a strange thing. And when there was the cycle commissioners came out together last year, and I thought did a brilliant statement where they said we all use cars, we all drive. That's okay, we're not saying you go back to hunter gatherers. We all use cars. I live in the countryside. I have no public transport. It's not realistic, but I don't have to use my car every day for everything. And so it's that shift, and how do you do it? I noticed it was interesting that Andy Burnham in Manchester isn't putting ULEZ in yet. He's taking a different approach. He's looking at doing increasing this B network with buses and things, and making sure the infrastructure's there rather than bringing the penalties in and forcing change that way. So you can see the difference, and that there's been a lot of pushback in Bristol, for example, that put the ULEZ in, and maybe it hasn't got all the infrastructure around it. So I'd say you have to be really clear about where you're trying to go, and this concept of freedom from and freedom to. There might be, I want my freedom to drive a car, but that's impacting the freedom for a child to play, or of the freedom of me to be able to walk around my neighbourhood easily. And you've got to try and really understand those issues to try and combat it and say, well, what does matter to you? What is a good life? How could these things do? And allow that you know people are going to need to drive. It's not a battle of the two. We've just got to work better together, because it's damaging our health and well-being.
Yeah. And I've seen all sorts of, particularly I was in transport, the number of people who just need to take off the road at particular sort of times is, and all those journeys under a mile or under a mile and a half.
Absolutely.
It's just phenomenal. And hopefully future transport solutions, I know scooters are a bit of a problem at the moment, but, if we get that right, people not walking, unfortunately, we still want to encourage people to walk the short distances, because as you say, we've taken it out of our daily lives because the work patterns have changed. But when we ran a school walking bus in the village where we live, we've been very lucky all our lives. I've always lived near the school, so I've always walked to school. I've never been driven to school, never taken our kids. But lots of busy parents had those excuses to say they were the same. So we just changed it a little bit and created a school walking bus, and we did it in a different way. So not everyone's trying to cram around the school gates in that 5-minute period that we all probably have experienced at some time, making it dangerous for children. There's other safe places to do it. So that comes on to other pieces as well. Some of the stuff you got around DEFRA, and quite rightly so. Again, going to my reading about Hygge and sort of the Danish experiences and those, but no one's ever sort of more than 10 minutes for some green space in Copenhagen. They're just sort of, if you look at, because you do the same as I do, if you look at happiness and well-being and all those places, and when you look at what the ingredients, and one of them is this just designing these sort of spaces and being able to cross. So I'm no sado now that when I'm on holiday I'm taking pictures of roundabouts where there's no way I need to get across there. It's going to take me half an hour to walk down there to get a crossing. So you do spot really obvious things, doesn't it? And I suppose it's like I've got family in wheelchairs, and you recognise a world of parked cars and drop curbs that is very different, etc. So I suppose we need a lens, don't we? I mean, talk us through, how do you get that lens that you look at every aspect of the community to see how you can open it up?
I think there's...
Yeah,
you've got amazing organisations like the Town and Country Planning Association who've been talking about this for years, and it's interesting about the 15-minute neighbourhoods and the concept that this is a new and dangerous thing. It's a 50s planning policy. It's
a conspiracy theory. I always like posting wonderful things about 15-minute, and suddenly all these conspiracy theorists were having a go at me for suggesting we're all going to lock everybody in their homes. But anyway,
and again, it's this freedom from and freedom to. It's like, how do you work it? I mean, I always think about car adverts. So that every car advert is this: you're driving across a desert and you've got this amazing space, or you're winding around a beautiful road in the Amalfi, which is gloriously empty. That isn't your reality in a car. You're stuck in a traffic jam and you're fed up and you're annoyed, and you just think it's it. So if you want to have that experience, we've all got to agree that we all do a little less of that, and then when I do need it, I get to my supermarket much easier. So you've got to work out how you don't necessarily remove it, but because you do need it for certain things, but how you manage it, and it has to be some policy and practice. So you can do nice things about urban allotments and repurposing. But you also need the attitudinal stuff, and I think you National Forest.
Just on the fringes of the Charnwood. So been not many trees. It's more in northwest Leicestershire, but we're just right on the edge, not far from here. We can walk to the edge of the National Forest. Yeah.
Again, what the National Forest has done is remarkable, and a perfect example to have a look at how policy has been implemented quite strictly in order to make really impactful change. And if you took that across, I know London want to make it a national park city, and you start looking at it from that point of view. How do you make it greener, and how do you impact policy on it? And also the other thing for me really is where children come in, and the concept of place efficiency. As soon as you've got those two things in, you've got to look at things differently. You've got to structure how you manage your planning and your access and all the rest of it. Suddenly flips. and then you can bring in the behaviour change support alongside it to help shift people into understanding the value. When we run a Beat the Street programme, every single time we'll have huge amounts of evidence of how people who live right by a park don't feel it belongs to them, don't access it, don't go there. So you've got to have the two things alongside, making places greener, making them nicer, safer, and then supporting people to access them and understanding why they're not accessing them. So there's lots of planning things that could be done that have been talked about for years, that we've mentioned. Increasing the biodiversity in places. I mean, that is happening really well in councils. There's lots of wildflower things, but more. In Burnley, they've just planted 2,500 trees through the programme we ran with them. All the children did it. They've created 9 microwoods across Burnley as a result of the work they've done, and it's brilliant. They own it, so the children can now go for a walk and watch their tree grow. How impressive is that as just a simple thing that's will have a big long-term impact in a place.
Yeah. No, they're great examples, aren't they? And I think you're right. It's that sort of, sometimes we make an assumption that we've created this green space, there is a park, we've done our bit. Whereas actually, sometimes it requires for different demographics and groups and people that access to that. But also something probably you do pick up in these emphasising, doesn't it? But quite often, it's just so that people feel safe. A lot of these places, as soon as it gets slightly dark, are not welcoming places for a lot of people. And there's a lot of work that Women in Sport and Sport England have been doing around the safety of women as well, and sort of what would be regarded as safe actually doesn't feel safe for women. So I suppose you've looked at all of those other sort of barriers as well, aren't they?
Yeah, we did some work in Northampton that was really interesting on that, and yes, just even from my own, I try and encourage my daughters and son to walk from home. He has no problem with it. My daughters get beeped every time they get jeered at, and that's not a nice environment for. So they're in exactly the same place and they're experiencing it completely differently. I know Eve Holt in Manchester is doing brilliant work with various groups there, and it's really interesting to see it because it's been a norm for so long, you kind of accept it, and it takes someone brave like the organisations doing it to highlight it, to think, that isn't right, is it? And it shouldn't be tolerated. And they are local groups making difference. There's also Safe Space for Girls. There's once you start looking across, there's all these amazing pieces of work that's happening. That's why the Sport for Development Coalition is so useful, because that is bringing those stories together and building the narrative, isn't it, of what is happening.
I mean, Simon in particular, Simon Lansley, who I'll hopefully be speaking to, and one of his others, he's very big on that sort of stories, just needing to tell the stories and what people are doing, because we can, and I know we're launching a report here, but it is like these chats and others, is that you've mentioned a whole series of other organisations are doing really good stuff, and it's people hopefully will pick that up and think, I need to look that up, I need to connect with those to find out how we could replicate that, because as we said a couple of times already, good stuff is happening. A lot of this isn't new, so what can we learn from the past, what can we learn from what is working well, and sort of build it into all of our futures, rather than these sort of episodic and sporadic good examples. And
move them from being nice things to have. I mean, I was looking at the budget cuts across all government, and huge budget cuts for culture and sport, but actually it was tiny to start with. and it's still not considered the wider impact. So I was looking at of all the things we've got, kind of what's the most important thing. There still has to be a central focus and priority on health and well-being through measurement, and that will help these other things flourish, because you've got to get into the mindset of the policy makers and the decision makers, and having some kind of understanding of what we're doing, and being able to explain the medical reason of how this is making us ill and costing us lots of money helps with that, because it's not about it's nice to have a little micro park somewhere. It's about this is fundamentally important for health and well-being of adults and children.
And that's why your chapter is really helpful. Like a lot that we encourage people, is that you're right, the DCMS budget, particularly for sport, is minute. I mean, it's the loose change or little initiative budget that most Secretary of State will have in their other departments for nice things to do. So actually, in the past, ironically, cutting the department's budget has not really been worthwhile. So take 10% off 100 million, it's not really saving the government very much. So actually, in previous rounds, it's sometimes been spared because the impact's enormous, but the money we get back is very little. Not sure. That's one of the reasons we try to make these as cost neutral as possible, is in the current financial window, the departmental cuts are sort of baked in for this next period. So departments are going to be facing quite severe restraints, and so money isn't going to be the answer, hence why all the things that you've been discussing. But also, DCMS is so small, the real wins are in all these other places you've talked about. I've got the document in front of me here, Department for DEFRA, education, health, all the planning sort of stuff is just so vital to us, and the role of local government in all of this.
Yeah.
So I know we all spend a lot of time concentrating on DCMS, but your work is in communities, and so who do you find are the most important partners at local level? I've already mentioned Andy Burnham and the mayors and local council and others.
It depends what level. So we'll obviously work at a council level, and we'll work with volunteering organisations and schools. Personally, and I forgot to mention, I'm also work with the Youth Sport Trust with the Welsh Schools movement, and that is phenomenal, making change, because we're so restricted at the moment in education and development. It's become, as the budget's reduced, it's become about behaviour and control and bare minimum, sort of Ryanair level of education, and actually missing again what helps a human flourish, what builds resilience for a child, and the Welsh schools are really addressing that with some amazing partners. And so for us, schools are still the heart of lots of communities. They're being asked to do unfeasible amounts of work, but they are still, especially as maybe some of the other areas of society have changed, sort of impact of church and things. The schools still are, and you talked about the school in your village, they really are the hearts of communities, urban or rural. And so I think they're key, and we find them really important. And the importance of the children's voice as well, and that feeling of, we're just teaching them stuff very linearly at the moment, so we're not necessarily helping them understand what they can do, giving them agency. So once they go out to work, they know how to manage themselves, they know what their health and well-being feels like, they know how to do this, and actually there's a danger there that I think we need to do. So I think schools are really, really important in places.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and then a lot of work around. We've lost those youth clubs, so
absolutely,
So the whole series of those community assets and drivers have been lost over quite a long period, haven't they? And the decline of the church and the sort of not necessarily its religious aspects, but just the fact that geographic buildings where stuff and place did. So the state of life stuff that Will's been doing and elsewhere in the stuff, they've looked at that, from an atheist point of view, looked at the value of church in its community, and it's enormous. And it's the same with sports clubs and other community hubs that they've reduced. Libraries have disappeared, and just those places of connection. And so you're right, schools remain right at the heart of that. Are there other examples? So physical, where they've lost. Have people reinvented where they gather as social beings? Or would a community, you talk about it really, these community assets, I think it is important. How do we build that back in without just building a hub and expecting everyone to come to it, going back to your co-creation?
I think there are opportunities. High streets are dying. They've got a massive problem. So there is an opportunity, obviously, to do things, and a lot of the places we work with are saying, how can we get people into the high street, or repurpose some of those places. I live just outside Newbury, and a lot of it, they lost a lot of shops, and actually a lot now are coming as little pop-ups and little community collaborations where people are doing it, and it feels lovely to walk around. So it's looking, I think you really have lost lots of assets, and again, where there's areas of highest deprivation, that's where they've gone the most. So you can really feel it in some places that a high street is betting shops and charity shops, and so you can't do it. So yes, and community centres and libraries being decimated, it's a real problem. So you have to look at what we have got. So there are lots of empty opportunities in high streets. How can you look at that? You have got the green assets of a place. How do you use those? But it doesn't need always infrastructure. It's how do you bring people together to use those. So in Burnley, they've got thousands of people going into their parks now because they're putting on lots of different different level activities, some arts and culture, some really, but small little community things, self-funded, not expensive, getting people down there to use what's out there. The canal, we work with the Canal and River Trust. They do brilliant things about getting people onto the canal. The canals are there. They're these incredible asset and use them. So, and schools for me. I love the Opening Schools fund that has been set up. I think that is, we just can't make schools do everything. That's the problem.
Yeah, again, I've talked to that with Sported and some of the other organisations here, is that, it does feel strange, doesn't it, that we supposedly own this school estate, and it's difficult for policymakers because of the way we now design our school system, no longer local education authorities. So that's had a massive impact, hasn't it? Sort of removing LEAs from that role for whatever reason, and academies and multi-academy trusts and the rest. That power has gone elsewhere, and we squeeze them. So why would they want to be running sort of leisure centres in the evening for people? They need
and we work in Scotland and England and Wales, but it's not like that in Scotland. No. So it's you can see how the change has happened, because we still work in Scotland with councils who do have direct access to schools. They work together really well. Some places that happens in England, others it's not. You've got 2,500 academy trusts now, so there's such a fragmented world there, which is why Youth Sport Trust work is so brilliant at convening people together and trying to look at what you do.
I suppose that's my take on this, is that we can make some big policy changes and encourage people to be a little bit politically brave, so that we're not all spending all of our valuable time in the sport physical activity sector trying to work out with a whole series of partners and well-paid people sitting around a table trying to open the school, whereas I don't want it to be sort of centrally run from everything, but a central edict that schools will be open and here's the budget to go with it would be the answer really to that, wouldn't it? Sort of shifting
I think so,
the emphasis back. So there are always unintended consequences of big policy decisions and political decisions, and that has been one. We all talk about it, but we need to put together something equally radical the other way around. So there comes as probably a commitment to deliver a particular level.
I think so. I think definitely we want to focus on what we can do, and I think that's why I love the stuff you've pulled together, because it is what can we do, not it's all broken. It's okay. Well, there are things we need to fix, so how do we? What are the different things? And it's brilliant. And you can see this is a citizens' assembly. You coalesce people together. So what do? Loads of things in here I wouldn't have thought of in a million years. But you took that down to a place level. You got 100 odd people, adults, children. Different life experiences together. What impact could that have on a place and an opportunity? The challenge is the bravery of the leader to allow that to happen, I think.
Yeah, so hopefully this comes across as a positive sort of like, it's got a challenge, got no money, but we could still do these things, and in marginal gain, we could still make an improvement by tinkering. It's not tinkering, some of these are quite fundamental, but if we could move in this direction, then we do believe there's about 130, some are 150, some do cost money, so there's quite a lot of ideas, and that is only touching the surface. You've already mentioned probably about 10 or 15 other organisations do wonderful things who should also have their say about what it is that they're doing. And so we just need to escalate these. I know there's lots of bodies around that do that, but this sector as well, about egos and logos and the silos and stuff. So hopefully this just throws people together to be reading other people's bits across the sector. So you quite rightly, you probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about what's happening at elite sport level, but they're now interested in what they can probably deliver elsewhere in the system. Athletes who want to volunteer around sport for development, there's constantly a crossover we just need to encourage, isn't there?
And an energy then, that's what you want, is the energy to go, okay, then how could we do this? What could we do? And that's what we definitely see in Burnley. You've made some small things that don't necessarily feel connected, but now that's it, you've got that energy, and then other things are possible that you never planned to start with, and you've got that rolling stone. So that's what it would be good to have.
And we definitely got together sort of like 20 or 30 of the most enthusiastic sort of people as well, sort of in it, and that's people that they can do approach to sort of stuff, isn't it? And some really good examples of that. So we've covered quite a lot, and I've probably only just covered probably sort of the top surface really of all that you do. But is there anything else you think we sort of missed out there, Katherine, before we sort of draw it to a close for people? Hopefully, your enthusiasm and the expertise you have has certainly come across, and I think it's been really
I don't think so.
really.
I think we've covered it all. I mean, what's our common purpose? What we're trying to do? We're trying to, and the sport and physical activity sector. I wouldn't want to work anywhere else. We can bring joy. I think that whether it's rounders, whether it's walking and going for a chat with your friend, whether it's elite sport, it brings joy at all different levels. And going back to what is a good life, that is in there, and those moments of joy and sport and physical activity do that. How can we contribute to a good life for humans? How can we help the environment? This manifesto is full of all of those things, and it's about collaboration and involving communities. And no, I think
make it sound quite simple.
Yeah, if only.
Yeah, and it actually should be, shouldn't it? I suppose that's the message to take away from this, is that sometimes we make it a bit too complex. Complexity is part of it, because we're dealing with
actually, and you have to be where people are. There's reasons. You've got infrastructure, institutions. Their responsibility is to look after that institution. You've got to unpick those things. You can't pretend that's not there. I'm not. But I think but you can change things.
And with, and let's go right back to the beginning, with individuals like yourself and William sort of making that case in using a word that advisedly but well, but an evangelical approach to it, but not in a sticky sort of way that's only us. I mean, just do get that sense of collaboration and working with so many different partners. Katherine, I think, is a prime example of how we could shift the dial substantially, and I know your stats and monitoring evaluation demonstrate that. So good luck, let's keep going, and if anybody's interested in any of your work in their locality, we'll put a link at the bottom to get in touch.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Andy, it was lovely talking to you today.
And you. Thanks, Katherine.
All right, take care, see you later.
Thanks for listening to the latest podcast. Hopefully you found it helpful and you've gained some insights from our guest. If you have enjoyed it today, it would be really helpful to hit the like button and subscribe wherever you get your podcast from. As always, feel free to pop over to any of our social media channels to comment or ask a question. Or sign up to our monthly newsletter at sportsthinktank.com. If you're interested in supporting our work at the Sports Think Tank, again, just head over to the website or drop me an email. Thanks, and see you again next time.